So you're very welcome to this part of today's Future Farm Walk here on Donald Kavanagh's farm. It's a panel discussion, and I'll introduce you to the experts that we have here in a moment. But the purpose of the panel discussion is really to build on the very practical displays and presentations that we had at the 3 stations out in the field. And I hope you'll join me in thanking the presenters, because I think overall the topics were really relayed in a very easy, applied and very simplified manner. So I think that really set the context, and the purpose of this panel is really just to tie together and to really see and hear from some of the key stakeholders in the industry how the sector is coming together to address water quality, fix water quality, and then prepare Ireland for, I suppose, the best possible chance at retaining a derogation. So that's really what we want to do. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our panel. To the left, we have Mary Gurry. Mary is EPA Programme Manager. She's been with the EPA for 25 years, and she works in the Office of Evidence and Assessment, which also includes hydrometrics on groundwater ecological monitoring and the catchments team. Beside Mary, we have Dr. Frank O'Mara. He is the director of Teagasc, lives nearby here in Carlow, and he'll be 3 years in role. And before joining Teagasc back in 2006, he was working with UCD as a postdoctoral researcher and also lecturer in animal nutrition and animal production. We also have here Ger O'Reilly from the ICMSA. He's vice chairman of the Farm and Rural Affairs Committee. And he is also a dairy farmer from Cavan, and thank you so much for making the journey here today to Donald Kavanagh's farm. Beside him, we have the man of the hour, Donald Kavanagh, a host farmer and also a Turlon Teagasc future farmer. He's an exemplary supplier and also a farmer that really shows that you can farm environmentally and economically sustainable. And he's a real role model and so representative of the many farmers in this room today. And beside Donald, we have Ty Buckley from the IFA. Ty is the Director of Policy and Chief Economist at the IFA. He is also a 2007 Nuffield Scholar, and he is a Corkman with a strong knowledge of Irish farming and the national and EU policy landscape. So that's Ty. And last but not least, we have Bill Callanan. He is the Chief Agricultural Inspector with the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, and he is responsible for environmental policy at the department. And I would like to thank you all for being here today and giving a short snapshot of some of the key pertinent topics that we have heard about today. We would also like to get you involved in the discussion, and hopefully we'll get to that point after we had a couple of more general questions for the panel. So time permitting, we'll ask you to raise your hand, wait for the microphone, identify yourself, and then ask the question that you feel is relevant to the panel, and we get an answer. And maybe just one small area I'd like to point out. Mary unfortunately has to leave very timely, so just in case you're wondering, Mary might drop off to ensure that she makes her next commitment in time. So with that, I'm going to pose my first question to Mary. You've just recently published the EPA Indicators of Water Quality report. What findings do you think are relevant to this group, and what is your, I suppose, outlook on where we are?
And hello, everybody. So the EPA's role with water quality is to monitor and assess water quality nationally and to report on how we're progressing with our targets. And it's been mentioned, I think, at the boards today that the goal is to achieve good or better water quality in all our water bodies. And that's an assessment of ecological status. And it's a very comprehensive assessment that looks at the overall quality and habitat and functioning and biodiversity in our rivers and water bodies. And and our aim, as has been said, is to protect those ones that are good and high, and then to improve those ones that aren't. And one of the key pressures on water quality is nutrients, which are phosphorus and nitrogen in particular, which can damage the water quality, damage the ecology, clogs up the rivers and stops the life in them thriving. So what we've seen we do a full assessment every 3 years, and our next assessment will be next year. But in the meantime, we do indicators report. So we've just published that. And what we're seeing really is that there's no change. There was no significant change at all really in any of the key indicators. So that was in the biological indicators and in the nitrogen and phosphorus concentrations. So in some ways that's good in that it's not a decline, which is always better. But what's happened is it's kind of stabilised at too high a level. So we have a particular problem with nitrogen in the south and southeast, and then we have problems with high phosphorus levels in different regions, kind of a band across from Limerick and up around Monaghan and the northeast. And that's those nitrogen mainly associated with high nitrogen levels and losses associated with freely draining soils in the southeast, and then the phosphorus, as has been said, associated with poorly draining soil. So we have a way to go, I suppose, to improve the overall ecological status and the biology, and ensure that we've good, healthy, clean, functioning rivers that support our economy, support our drinking water, support agriculture, is to get those nutrient levels down, and that's to get those losses of nitrogen and phosphorus out of our water bodies insofar as we can.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mary. I think it's really helpful to get kind of better clarity on what water stabilisation really means, because there's been a lot of discussions on what the requirement is for retention of the derogation, and I think understanding what exactly we're looking to stabilise at, which is essentially, at good status, and the requirement to actually improve the poor status. That's a really important definition of what we're working towards, and having that alignment is hugely important. My second question really is in relation to the EPA's role, and also the acknowledgement at the last Teagasc Water Quality Campaign launch of, I suppose, the proactive role that the sector is playing in addressing water quality. And I know this is, I suppose, a movement that's currently building, and your director had acknowledged it on the panel discussion, which I thought was really positive, because it is acknowledging events such as these today that are taken that are taking place across the entire nation, and are being organised by different organisations and co-ops to really help farmers address water quality on the ground. Do you see further evidence of this good work here today?
Yeah, Lisa, I do. I mean, I think it's true to say that, the last few years, since, particularly maybe the last 4 or 5 years, there has been much more focus on improving water quality in all the sectors, agriculture and wastewater, and the other ones, forestry and others. And we can see that. And particularly, I suppose, the last year, I think that's just gone off. Yeah, the last year, I suppose, with the focus on the derogation, has really upped the ante again, I suppose. And I think there's a lot of information now in terms of what the problem is, where the problem is, and what the measures are, the solutions, in terms of the science coming from Teagasc, coming from the EPA, and putting all that together and trying to kind of provide information to farmers that can help them make the right choices that will work for them and work for the environment. So, and I think these kind of events where people are learning from each other, I think we all benefit from learning from others and hearing stories and seeing stuff in practice and on the ground. So yeah, it's great to see such a huge crowd out today as well. So, it is good to see in the Teagasc Water campaign now, hopefully giving clear and advice, and, just what people can do and what they need to do. There's obviously a lot of work happening in terms of increasing agricultural inspections, and no one wants to be inspected, but at the end of the day, it's important to achieve compliance, as the baseline is to try and achieve compliance with the GAP regs, and then all the work to try and improve efficiency and really get the N losses down, and get the efficiency as high as possible, and just reduce the impact and save some. I think somebody mentioned about saving money too in the process, which I think we're all interested in.
Absolutely, and I think that brings me on nicely in terms of the actions, the knowledge transfer, the behavioural shifts that are required, but also the research. So that brings me on to Frank. And Frank, you recently just launched the Teagasc Water Quality Campaign, and I think it would be really helpful for the audience in the room to maybe just get a brief summary from you what that exactly means, and what farmers can expect, and what actions they should be implementing.
Thanks, Lisa. And just first of all, want to acknowledge we're on a lovely farm here today, Donal, and fair play to you and a lot of credit due to you and the family here in terms of the way you have the place. And it is a great farm on which to do an event like this, because there's so much good stuff to see. And also want to acknowledge my colleagues, Sandra Hayes and Bridget Lynch, who were working hard out there for the last couple of hours on the stands. And we're delighted to be working with Tier on this event. You know, it's very much about a partnership approach. So going back to the campaign that we launched 2 weeks ago, it's called Better Farming for Water, 8 Actions for Change. And this was on foot of a request from the Minister to pull out all the stops in terms of the advisory effort around water quality, and to do that in a multi-actor way. He was very specific on that because, you know, it is important, I suppose, that everybody who has influence with farmers is really on the pitch, and that we're talking to farmers in a coordinated way. So, you know, what we're seeing here today, and we'll say the Tier Lawn Slaney project is a very good example of bringing all the actors together. That's ourselves, the County Council, the other industries in the county, all together working on water quality in the Slaney catchment. So our campaign is really about supporting all farmers to do the things that might need to be done on their farms to improve water quality. And we have that distilled down into, I suppose, 8 actions. And I won't go through the 8 of them now in the interest of time, but they drill down to 3 main areas. It's nutrient management, it's farmyard management, and it's land management. And just what we've seen out here today on Donald's farm, in terms of nutrient management, that's about getting your soil fertility right. It's about reducing your nitrogen surplus or getting your nitrogen efficiency as high as you can. And then it's about applying those nutrients at the right time and in the right place. Farmyard management, it's about having enough slurry and soil water storage. And again, Donald, you have excess storage capacity on your farm here. But the other big, really important side of farmyard management is making sure you're controlling runoff from your farmyard and from farm roads. And the last area is land management, and that's your buffer strips and your riparian margins. And in the case of tillage ground, it's having a winter green cover on that. So they're the 8 actions. And I suppose in our campaign, what we'll be doing is mobilising the full Teagasc Advisory Service to engage with our clients and indeed non-clients around those actions, and, you know, supporting farmers to do what needs to be done on their particular farm.
Yeah, and I think that's really good work, and we were delighted to actually see the programme then in its full entirety, and I think it's going to, you know, affect and bring about significant change, and also create alignment across the various organisations that go out and engage with farmers, and I think that's definitely needed and will provide a lot of clarity. We've seen a lot of commentary about the potential impact of the loss of derogation, and that's obviously what's here at the forefront of most people's mind as they sit here in the room. And we also know that we do need to meet certain criteria as outlined by Mary in terms of water quality. How could we achieve those water quality improvements that the Commission requires us to meet? And is it possible to farm a 220 and bring about good water quality?
So is it possible to farm a 220 and have good water quality? And the answer is absolutely yes. But it's also possible to farm a 220 and not, you know, to be having a negative impact on water quality. And likewise, it's possible at a low stocking rate to be having a negative impact on water quality. It's all, there's 2 things that feed into that. Well, 3 things, and 2 of them are within farmers' control. The first is the amount of nutrients that you have that are available to be lost to water. That's your surplus of nutrients. And we want to minimise that. And that's all about getting your nitrogen surplus down or improving your nitrogen use efficiency. So that's the surplus that's available to be lost into water bodies. But a hugely important part then is how you manage your nutrients and how you manage your land and how you manage your farmyard. That's going to influence whether a lot of that surplus gets into water or whether very little of it gets into water. So definitely by focusing in on the 8 actions for change as we have them, getting your nutrient management right, your farmyard management right, and your land management right, you absolutely can farm a 220, and that be very compatible with good water quality. The third factor that comes into play that is outside your control is the weather. And we know that weather plays a huge influence as well on water quality, which you've got to try and manage, I suppose, within that. You know, we can't control it, but we can manage around it. And I suppose that's where, you know, taking cognizance of weather forecast comes into play when you are applying either fertilizer, chemical fertilizer, or organic manures. So yes, I think we can. And you know, when you look at what's happened, I suppose, in the last couple of years, we have brought in a lot of additional measures through the Nitrates Action Programme and the Nitrates derogation on our farms to reduce that nitrogen surplus. You know, we have lower chemical fertilizer limits, we have lowered stocking rate, we had banding brought in, which, you know, for some people effectively, you know, reduced the number of animals they were carrying. So it was all about reducing the load. And we also have a lot brought in then about better managing the load in terms of regulation. But from our point, you know, we're not regulators, we're advisors, but we're putting a huge effort into advising farmers how to minimise that load and how to manage it better. And I suppose a lot has happened in the last couple of years that should contribute towards that. And hopefully we will see, we didn't see it in the latest EPA water quality reports, but you know, hopefully the trend is moving in the right direction, and we will see the impact of those measures coming through in the next number of years.
Yeah, and I think that's a really positive outlook. And you know, I'm looking into Bill's direction with our Director of Teagasc indicating that farming at 220 is possible while also getting water quality right. That must give you, I suppose, a good, you know, background for the dossier you're going to be presenting to the European Commission to retain the derogation. And Nolene has done a really fantastic job explaining the timelines and the process behind it. But, you know, maybe looking at the evidence today, and, you know, I think the turnout here at this farm walk is a real testament to the commitment of the sector. How is the department and relevant state bodies complementing these efforts to really make sure that we get water quality right now and in the coming weeks and months?
Yeah, well, I suppose just before I answer that, I'm going to kind of maybe make a couple of statements, because it does require me to be clear with everybody in relation to what is the department's position in relation to it. The department and government are committed to putting the best foot forward in terms of securing a derogation, making the best application in terms of that, and to secure a derogation at the maximum stocking limit allowable, okay? So that has to be clearly understood, that I see my job in many ways, we enable and we regulate the sector, but ultimately it's to the benefit of the sector and having a vibrant agricultural sector here in Ireland, and we see the derogation as a critical part of that. When you've then taken that as the kind of that principle, you look at how do you then make the best case? And that can't be just based on, well, look at, we are unique, which is a term that I'm hearing a lot of, let's say, that people are saying, well, we have a unique system. We do, and I want to be clear, and we have to recognize the work that farmers are doing and have done in terms of, you know, improvements on farms. But we're not unique in terms of the target, which is improving water quality, which when you go to Brussels, you're talking about that in general terms, which every country has committed to right across Europe. Okay, so when they look at it, yes, we, I suppose, evidence and describe the unique situation we have in Ireland, which is a grass-based outdoor system, which isn't commonplace in Europe, but then that must be compared as well to that requirement in terms of ensuring good water quality. And the Commission have been clear that they will view it in terms of they want to see in good status areas that that's at least maintained, and in less than good that we are on a trajectory of improvement. And that's what I've seen in the last while. I'm at this a long time, that there's now an engagement of industry, of farmers, etc., towards that objective, and we have to harness that. As Frank has said, there's an ask in terms of the water quality campaign. But on top of that, there's also, the way I describe it, we sit on a three-legged stool in terms of supporting the industry. There are regulations, and nobody likes regulations, and let's be honest about it, but they are a necessary requirement to, I suppose, stop poor practice. But I can assure you, for any regulation that anybody wants to refer to, most farmers, and the best of farmers in particular, are way above that standard already. Okay, whether it's spreading slurry during the winter, you know, that has, you know, people have moved on from a criticism in terms of that as to how best to use the slurry. So Frank has said we've reduced the chemical fertilizer allowances. We've extended the closed period because that's clearly identified as an area of loss. We've introduced a fertilizer database. So those are the elements in terms of the regulatory side. In terms of the incentives then, it's grant aid under the likes of TAM. So 125 million alone has been spent in the last 4 or 5 years on supporting farmers in terms of low emission equipment or storage, just on those 2 elements alone. And there, in addition to that, the Ministers for Agriculture and Housing recently launched a 60 million euro investment in the European Innovation Programme to give practical financial assistance to farmers to introduce measures on farms. So that's the type of, I suppose, incentive that's available. And then there's also that support to the greater discussion. And that includes, for example, the payment for the agricultural catchment programme that you heard from about outside. Also support from a state side, we support, there's 20 advisors working free in terms of the ASSEP programme, complemented then by an industry contribution, giving you 47 advisors out there today working with farmers on a free basis in areas that have been identified by the EPA of where improvement can be done and is necessary. So I suppose the last point then I'd make is that I also sit on a water quality group, which is a huge shift forward from what I've seen over the years, where now we have a group which includes the farm bodies, it includes industry, it includes various stakeholders, and saying, well, look at what practically, how can we support farmers in terms of trying to improve water quality? And I said 3 areas that we'd like to focus on. Number 1, what are the necessary regulatory changes we have to do? Secondly, how do we improve compliance? Not by somebody looking over the ditch, but a greater understanding of why the rules are in place. And third one, how do we connect farmers to water quality locally so that they know how their farming practice is impacting on water quality? And that's an area we're working on with the stakeholders today, as to saying, well, look at how can we make it more visible, understandable to farmers, and it's not just the rules, if you understand. So there's a whole series of interventions that are there. But the main message I want to give to people is there is a commitment to securing a derogation at government level, and the department is, I suppose, fully engaged in making sure that we're in the best possible place. But that does require change. It does require engagement and does require improvement in water quality.
Thanks, Bill. And I think it's really promising and gives me a lot of hope hearing you state and articulate your commitment to going over to Brussels to negotiate a retention of the derogation. And I think everyone in this room will mirror this. And I think that's a very good starting point, combined with the science and also the programme that has been put into place. Maybe if I'm looking into the direction of Chair from an ICMSA perspective, how concerned are farmers on the ground about the potential impact of the loss of the derogation, and what is the ICMSA doing to voice those concerns and bring about change?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Yeah. And first of all, I just want to commend Donald here beside me on the way he's presented his farm here today for everybody, and congratulate him on that, and his family. Sorry, is that better? And thank everybody for attending so well. It's great to see such a good crowd engaging with a topic like this, and well done to the organisers of the event for putting it together. Farmers are very, very concerned on the ground about the future of the derogation. The lack of clarity on where we're headed for in the next 12 to 18 months is really delaying and causing a lot of anxious decisions for farmers because they're struggling to know how to plan for the future, how to decide whether to invest or not in whatever they might want to do for their farm without knowing what stocking level they're going to be at going forward, and how they're going to make that investment pay for their farm in the future, So really, ICMSA, we'd like to see a lot more clarity around the whole issue, and obviously we'd like to see a decent time period given to allow farmers to adapt to any changes that may or may not be needed. The issue of TAMS is critical to all of this. And I'd like to take the opportunity to again say to Bill that we need TAMS approvals to be sped up, and we need TAMS costings to be looked at. At ground level, at local level with ICMSA, we've been engaging with farmers on the ground for the last 18 months at least around the whole nitrates issue, trying to get the information out to people on the ground about what's going on, about what changes may be coming down the line, and trying to inform and support our farmers in the best possible way.
Thank you very much for that. I think that sums it up very well. And I think the concern about the uncertainty of where farmers are heading is the most significant concern. And it's not something at the moment, unfortunately, we can put out of the room, which is a pity, but would obviously provide a lot of clarity. Maybe looking into the direction of Ty, just from the perspective of the IFA and looking into this room and also all the other events that have been taking place, you see a lot of, I suppose, key stakeholders within the sector coming together to align on this really pertinent issue, and everybody's looking for the same outcome, which is a retention of the derogation. How does this unified approach, in your eyes, strengthen the work that the IFA is doing here in Ireland, but also in Brussels?
Thanks, Lisa, and first of all, thanks for the invite here today to speak it. And just to reiterate what's been said already, it's great to see a farm like this, which is a commercially run farm, well run in terms of from a financial performance, but also showing that you can combine that with a very sustainable from an environmental perspective as well. So I suppose in terms of the derogation and the importance of it, I mean, the derogation to Irish agriculture is hugely important, and losing it would be, if you look at the figures, it's probably not, it's the equivalent of going through something like a hard Brexit for the dairy sector. And I think a lot of the commentary that's been on it in the past, or maybe a lot of the understanding of, well, this is just a derogation dairy farmer issue, or it's just a dairy farmer issue, when in reality it's not at all. It's actually an economy-wide issue, because first of all, just to put it in context, 1 in 10 hectares in Ireland at the moment is farmed under derogation. And if you look at a county like Cork or Kilkenny, which are the two highest, 1 in 4 hectares are under derogation. So any changes to that derogation is going to have a massive impact on the derogation dairy farmers, the non-derogation dairy farmers potentially, if they're in the land market, non-dairy farmers, again, because it has such an impact in terms of land demand, and obviously then the downstream industries, like the processors and other sectors that are completely dependent on us progressing in terms of from the dairy perspective. So it's a massively important issue. And for that reason, we have to come at this at a whole of sector and a whole industry approach. And I suppose that's why we have been working together with the likes of the ICMSA and ICOS and MOCRA, trying to put together a common approach, because we all want exactly the same, which is, to secure this derogation, and also to be able to communicate to farmers to say, listen, we're doing all we can, but we need you to come on the journey with us as well. And that's why the campaigns like Teagasc have done here now is so important in terms of the better farming for water. Because as well as that, the other thing we've got to get across to farmers is we need all farmers to come on this journey. Because if just derogation farmers do the actions, and we don't have non-derogation farmers, be it dairy or non-dairy, also taking on actions, we're not going to be able to get the impact that allows Bill's team to go over to Brussels to allow us to continue to retain this derogation, which we should have based on our farming system and based on our capacity to take up additional nutrients. So that's why we have to work together on this, and we are working together to make sure we put our best foot forward.
And I think it's wonderful to hear you actually talk about the unified approach, the role of all agricultural enterprises within it. And I think that's exactly what needs to happen and is happening. So we've heard about the signs, from Mary and also from Frank. We heard about the supports that the government is putting into place to bring farmers along. We heard from the two farm orgs how they're working in Brussels and also here nationally to make the case to support farmers. Now, I'd like to ask Donal from a very applied perspective and, seeing the great work you're doing here on your farm with your wife and your family, what are some of the small little things that you've implemented where you say, that was only a small shift, but it's made a really, really significant difference? Because I think that's going to be hugely relevant to the audience in this room to hear you share what some of those key minor changes or atomic habits are that brought about or bring about significant water quality change.
Thank you very much. I farm here with my wife, and I have 3 kids, and they're actively giving me a hand from time to time. And I'm in this program for the last couple of years, and I'm no different than most of the lads out there, and they're all doing pretty much the same as what I'm doing. I suppose, for me, I'm more focused because I'm on this program, and I find Sandra is my person there on the program, and she's great. So we soil test the whole farm, and from there then it's all about getting the three legs of the stool right. So we get and we focus on the farm then in general and on the slurry spreading and the P, the K, correcting everything and the soil and the lime and everything else. So this year now, we've been doing this over a few years, but every year you just get a bit better at it and you get more focused. And I think the fact that I've the extra bit of slurry storage does give me an edge in the sense that I don't have to go out in January, I don't have to go out in February. I struggle through March there as long as I can. If I get the weather then and I think there's a bit of growth, I will start spreading. So at that stage then I keep going with the slurry as much as possible. I focus on say if I'm spreading 20, 30 units in March, and we have every month mapped out, 30 units, 40 units, 20, and drop back then. If I have the slurry tested as well, so I know the nutrients of the slurry, so it's 10 units in my own head there per 1,000 gallons. So if I can get 3,000 gallons onto a field, I drop back my nitrogen. So I'm putting out 50 units, I only put out 20 units of chemical nitrogen. And that's the way I focus there. And I'm here at the moment now, and I have all the slurry gone, finished. I didn't start spreading, I'd say, until about the 1st of April. And the weather didn't play very well, so I didn't get any out for the first cut. But in between now and then, I have been focusing heavily on if I got a graze, out with the slurry, drop the chemical, and so on, and worked all around. So to the stage now where I've all my slurry gone, and the only fertilizer I'm going to be using from now on will be chemical, but on a lot lower base. And I've managed to still grow 13.5 tonne last year, and I can see a big saving in fertilizer, significant this year, on the back of all that. And that's where I've geared myself up to, and we work from there on. So that's one of the small things, but it's definitely financially viable as well. I mean, for me, I'm saving money. So at the end of the day, I'm farming that I'm trying to create the smallest footprint as possible as regards pollution or anything else. So that's one way I see that has worked very well.
Thanks for those insights, and I certainly think in terms of the audience that we have here today is probably the most important reflection of the day, to hear you talk about the changes that work for you, and I think this peer-to-peer learning approach is going to be highly successful in bringing those changes across. So if anybody has any further questions for Donal, I'm sure you'd happily engage in conversation one-on-one afterwards. In terms of getting maybe 1 or 2 questions from the floor, we have a rolling microphone here. So if there's anyone that would like to ask any of our expert panelists a question, we can certainly find some time for that. Just over there. And if you could just identify yourself and post a question and maybe state who the question is for.
Eugene Lawler's the name, and the question is for Bill Callanan. He stated that there was 125 million spent on TAM, so I would say that the farmers have spent nearly 190 million on the same sort of development. And all the questions here are about nutrient management. So we've two. We've CAN in particular, and I'm just wondering at what stage will the move made to take CAN out of the system and use much more protected urea. And the second one is, and Donald has maybe really added to it there, the slurry storage capacities. We have a legacy slurry storage capacity here that cannot be addressed or is not being addressed, in particular with TAMs. If we're really serious, we need to make sure that the likes of 70% storage is available for the farmers to keep that slurry in their yard to use it the very same way as Donald has just said. Thank you.
So the question was CAN versus protected urea. So we have engaged, first of all, with industry in terms of supporting that change. Okay. It's done, however, through collaboration rather than regulation. We do have issues in relation to unprotected urea, but just to give you kind of some figures, I don't want these, I suppose tabulated, but they're approximates, and I have the figures on my desk. If you look in 2018, we were using about 135 or 40,000 tons of CAN, and at that time about 40,000 tons of urea, 30 to 40,000 tons. That's not exact, these are roughly. Last year we used about 70,000 tons of CAN, 56,000 tons of CAN and 56,000 tons of urea in both protected and unprotected. So that move towards protected urea is happening. Is it happening fast enough? It does need to happen quicker, but it has to be, I suppose, through collaboration, I suggest. Farmers, though, have made tremendous progress in terms of reducing the overall usage of fertilizer. So in 2018, we were using about 420,000 tons of nutrient N. That's not bags of nitrogen, that's nutrient in the bag. So 27% nitrogen is 27% of the weight is calculated to give me that 408,000 tons. And last year it was 280,000 tons. And that has to be recognized. And that's through better use of slurry, because you still need the nutrient, and it's better timing. And I think farmers have to, I keep on saying, farmers, it has to be recognized the progress that's been made by farmers, but it's also responsible of me to call out what progress can be made and what needs to be done next. So on the CAN versus urea, we are making progress in terms of that change. It is through the likes of sustainability bonuses, I'm sure, that our Tier Land could comment, and other co-ops are done that overall change. But from a water point of view, nutrient is nutrient. So whether it's from farmer urea or CAN, if you have a certain amount lost into your local river, it doesn't make a difference in terms of how that load is calculated from Mary Gorry's point of view.
Yeah, and maybe just to add from the Turlon perspective, like you called out, the incentives are within our patronage system for protected urea usage, and Thomas here will be able to give you some more detail on that afterwards, and also in relation to our sustainability action payment, where it's one of the qualifying actions. So thank you for that question. I think that was really helpful. Slurry storage, apologies.
Yeah, but I think that's a comment, that's an ask in terms of saying, well, look, so all I can articulate is the current situation the Minister has announced. So we have a support for farmers in terms of slurry storage. Number two, the Minister has announced that there will be a specific category for somebody importing slurry. So if that's moving it from one farm to another. And number three, that the Department will introduce a separate threshold in terms of slurry storage, and those processes are being put in place.
I'm inquiring there about 3,000 gallons to the acre putting out slurry on grazing land. What effects is that going to have on the worm in the ground? You continuously put slurry out in the ground, you're going to kill the worm, you're going to destroy the land. Like, it doesn't add up.
So look, I'm no expert on that, on the soil biology, but we have We have, a long history, I suppose, of applying slurry onto our grazing land. And as part of the signpost programme, we've done some analysis of the health of our soils. And the health of our soils is very, very good across the 100-odd farms that are in the signpost programme. I think 92% of them are in what you describe as very, very good quality. And that relates to the biology that's in the soil, and it's not about the nutrients. It's not just about the nutrient level in the soil. So I suppose I'm not aware of any evidence that putting on slurry at those kind of levels will have any impact on the biology in our soils, or any negative impact. Maybe some of my colleagues that are in the audience might know a bit more and want to jump in, but if they do, please do.
Great. Is there any other questions from the audience?
Lisa, I might deal with your question there. Just in terms of that fertilizer, there's a piece in the paper yesterday in relation to suggested imports from Northern Ireland, so I may as well address it. And so we have no evidence in relation to effectively suggested illegal importation. There is a legitimate trade comes from Northern Ireland every year in any event. But I just do want to advise people who might think, oh, geez, this is a way to get extra fertilizer. There are issues for any farmer who's found not in compliance as a result of, I suppose, purchasing fertilizer outside of the database or trying to avoid the database. The fertilizer database has been introduced, and it's not a constraint on farmers. I want to be clear, and it's not being used as a compliance issue, except if you're subject to an inspection. So not every farmer is going to be, I suppose, checked against the database. That's just not the way it works. It's around calculating nutrient load. But if somebody is deliberately trying to circumvent it, and there was a show of hands at one of the stands in terms of the number of derogation farmers, your derogation will be removed, and it is not available in the second year if it is a deliberate attempt to effectively circumvent fertilizer allowances, and people should be clear on that. There are also fines available under the regulation, but I want to be clear equally with farmers. The objective of the exercise is around, I suppose, managing and understanding where the nutrient loads are, improving, I suppose, and making it easier for farmers in terms of reporting, and not a kind of a compliance piece. But I certainly would, if anybody has a sense that, we've no evidence that it's happening, but if somebody has a sense, oh, geez, this is something I could do on the side, I'd caution against it. I want to be clear. Okay.
Thanks for clarifying, Bill. I think that's helpful. If there's no more further questions from the ground, I think maybe just to sum up the three key takeaways from today's panel. I think firstly, we can really see movement building, and I think that's really strong and really positive in terms of going to the Commission and making the case for Ireland. We have scientific evidence coming together with applied advisory and best practice, and I think that's hugely important and will really support our farmers on the ground. We were also able to hear from the department and also the farm orgs that they're very supportive of the retention of the derogation, and they're up for the fight. And I think that's hugely important, and we should leave with a very positive outlook in that they have their brief and they're very clear on that. And that commitment is crucial for Ireland to reapply for the renegotiation in Brussels. And thirdly, and most importantly, I think what we can see from Donal, but also everyone else in this room, farmers are truly committed to making the change on the ground and to fix water quality. And if we all walk away, and that's the key message that we have, I think that's very, very strong, and it will really help us going forward. With this, I'd like to thank the panelists for their time and their experts' insights here. I'd like to thank all of you here today. We know it's not easy taking time out from your farm, and we really do appreciate it. But I do think events such as these today, and as I mentioned earlier, they're taking place all across the country. They're hugely important to really bring about the change we need, and also to signal to all relevant stakeholders that we are committed as an industry. So thank you very much. And also, days like today don't just happen. So there's a whole team of colleagues and presenters and organisations that have helped to make this day a success, and I hope you join me in thanking everyone involved. We'll be here for a little while longer if there is any questions from your side. And with that, I'd like to close the event and thank you all again for all the great work you're doing to make water quality better and to stabilise it where it is already good. Thank you.